Right, so today we'll look at the stomach. This session will focus on the stomach. So as you can see already, we're saying the stomach is J-shaped. Stomach is J-shaped. Now, the stomach, like any other part of the digestive system, has the same basic structure. There's mucosa inside. Then we're going to find submucosa, we'll find muscle layer, then we're also going to find serosa, since the stomach is located just below the diaphragm. Now, what makes the stomach so special? First things first is that the stomach is the largest or the most dilated portion of the digestive system. As such, this organ is adapted to store food for some time and also initiate various processes of chemical digestion. Remember that chemical digestion begins in the mouth with breakdown of carbohydrates by amylase, salivary amylase. But breakdown of fat, breakdown of proteins begin in the stomach. Before we even go any further, I would like to look at divisions of the stomach. So the stomach is divided into the following parts. The part that is immediately connected to the esophagus, we call it the cardiac region. So this is known as the cardiac region or the cardia, if you like. Next is the fundus. Fundus is the superiormost portion of the digestive system. Then we also have the body being the largest and middle part of the digestive, of the stomach. That is the body. Then we have the pylorus and its canal. So the first part of the pylorus, we call it the antrum. The distal part of the pylorus, we call it the canal. Then we see that the pyloric canal ends in thickened muscles. These muscles here and there, we call this as the pyloric sphincter. This is a very true anatomical sphincter, as we can see here, quite different from the one found in the esophagus there. So in terms of effectiveness, the pyloric sphincter is more effective in closing the stomach than the cardiac sphincter, or what we call the esophageal sphincter. Okay. So those are the parts of the stomach: fundus, cardiac, body, pylorus. That's one. Now, on the surface of the stomach, we are going to discover two curvatures. Pardon me. Hello, sis, Ndim class. Yeah. All right, sorry for that. So we're saying on the surface of the stomach, we see two caves or arcs. So one arc is less, the other one is great, covering the whole, this part. So we call this as a lesser curvature. So lesser curvature is found between the esophagus, the side of the esophagus here, and the side of the pylorus, whereas the greater cave covers all the way from the other end of the esophagus here, this point called the cardiac notch, all the way around the fundus, around the body, and up to the pylorus there. We call this as the greater cave. Okay. Now let's go inside the structure of the stomach and see what it's made up of. What are its internal structures there? So number one is when the stomach is cut open, we see that its inner lining, the mucosa, is highly folded. We call this as rugae. Therefore, when the stomach is empty, it's a very small structure. You wouldn't even recognize it. You think it's part of the large intestine. It's very small. But when food begins to go in, the stomach stretches because it has these folds. So anything that is folded has room to be stretched. But something, if it's already stretched, there's no room for further stretching. So the rugae increase the surface area. So when the stomach is empty, you find a lot of rugae. When the stomach is full, only a few are present because at that time the stomach is fully stretched. So these lines we are seeing, these folds, are called gastric rugae because there are other structures in the body that have rugae also. For example, the bladder. The urinary bladder has rugae. Okay. Even the vaginal tube has rugae also. Now, let's compare these rugae and find what type of epithelium covers these folds. So these folds, you're saying it's mucosa folds. What type of epithelium? So if we observe carefully, we'll see that these are columnar cells. Let's go to this one. Yeah, this one is much better. So this is one fold. The fold goes in like that, then up. So one fold here, another fold there. So this is rugae. The space between the rugae, we call them as gastric pits. So we have rugae in the stomach. At the same time, we have gastric pits. So these are pits here. Now see that all pits are lined by simple squamous epithelium. So these are simple squamous cells. Simple columnar epithelium, sorry. Simple columnar epithelium. That is simple columnar epithelium. Now, these cells are not of the same. Even though they are all simple columnar, these cells have different function. The cells have different function. They are all columnar cells, but what they produce is totally different from each other. Let's begin with the surface cells. So surface cells, like the name suggests, they are found here on the surface. Okay. So these cells are mucus cells. Okay. So these are mucus cells. What they do is simply produce mucus. Remember, mucus protects this epithelium from damage by hydrochloric acid. Then as we go down the pit, there's this part here, which we call the neck or the isthmus. So the pit goes in, then reaches a stage where we call it a neck, then branches into two glands. So this is one gland, that's another gland. We covered glandular tissue under epithelial tissue 2. I'll refer you back to that lesson. So these are tubular glands, branched tubular glands. We discussed this under glands because they are more like a tube. Two tubes to one duct. Therefore, this is a branched tubular gland. Okay, now we're saying at the neck there, we'll find another mucus cells. So the mucus cells on the surface, we call them surface mucus cells. The mucus cells located in the neck region here, we call them neck mucus cells. Neck mucus cells. Okay, they produce mucus also to protect the stomach from acids. Okay. Then which other cells do we find apart from the neck mucus cells? As we go down further, we are going to find parietal cells. Parietal cells are also known as oxyntic cells. Oxyntic cells. So, oxyntic cells are the cells responsible for producing two important chemicals. Number one is hydrochloric acid. Number two is intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is essential in the absorption of vitamin B12 by the large intestines. So, vitamin B12 is known as extrinsic factor, whereas intrinsic factor is secreted by parietal cells. So as long as there's this intrinsic factor, then vitamin B12 will be easily absorbed from the large intestines. So these cells are found here at the entrance of the glands. As we go down further on the gland, we are going to find chief cells, or otherwise known as oxyntic cells. So oxyntic cells are also known as, chief cells or zymogenic cells. Chief cells or zymogenic cells. So these cells are responsible for producing pepsinogen and gastric lipase. Pepsinogen, as it is moving up toward the duct, when it comes in contact with hydrochloric acid produced by these cells here, it becomes activated and it is now called pepsin. Then pepsin is the one that is essential in digesting proteins. Then gastric lipase initiates lipid digestion in the stomach. So that is from chief, or otherwise known as zymogenic cells. Then at the base of the gastric gland here, we find G cells. They are named G because of the substance they produce, known as gastrin. So gastrin is a local hormone. When gastrin is produced, it works on these cells, chief cells and parietal cells, so that they can produce more of their secretion. So there will be more hydrochloric acid produced, more intrinsic factor, more pepsinogen, and more gastric lipase. So we call them as enteroendocrine cells. Entero meaning digestive system, endocrine because of this hormone they produce, a local hormone known as gastrin. Okay, so that's about the gastric gland. So this is a gastric gland found here. So the gastric pit acts as a duct, then it splits in half to give us these two glands. Then besides the gastric glands, we have these folds, which we call rugae. So rugae, and the rest. Okay. So this product, mucus from this cell, hydrochloric acid, intrinsic factor, pepsinogen, gastric lipase plus gastrin is what is known as gastric juice. Gastric juice. So these are glands shown here again. Folds. Then in between the folds, we have gastric pit. At the bottom of the pit, we have glands. Now, the shape of these glands are tubular, if you can see, and then they are branched. And they produce gastric juice. Okay, so this is explained. Those cells I was just talking about. So we look at the size of the stomach. So we're saying the stomach varies. It may be, in adults, it may be 1.5 to 2 liters in terms of maximum capacity. Okay, so others can even go 2.5, depending on how much your stomach can accommodate. So that was about the mucosa. What about the submucosa? So the submucosa is the same. It is still connective tissue. Remember, these are the folds, those are the pits, these are the glands. Then we are saying separating mucosa from submucosa is a thin muscle layer here, known as muscularis mucosa. This is consistent throughout the digestive system. Before you go to submucosa, there's a smooth muscle layer, a thin layer called muscularis mucosa. So we're now looking at submucosa, which is just connective tissue, and see that in the submucosa, we have abundant lymphatic vessels shown in gray here, which are passing through the muscularis, going into the glands. We have veins, we have arteries, and the nerves. You can see some yellow spots there. Those are nerves. So the nerves found in the submucosa, we call them submucosa nerve plexus or Meissner's nerve plexus. Meissner's nerve plexus. Where is it? Okay, I don't have it. But it's there in some, yeah, Meissner's nerve plexus. So these are nerves found in the submucosa. They control blood vessels here, lymphatics, and the cells in the submucosa and mucosa. We now look at the muscle layer. Now, we said the entire digestive system, the muscle layers are two, inner circular, outer longitudinal. But when it comes to the stomach has three. This is the area of the digestive system that is a bit different. So instead of having inner circular and outer longitudinal, the stomach has the following. It has inner oblique. You see that the fibers are going in that direction. They are cutting the stomach at an angle like that. So we call them oblique. They are in that sense. Then we have midocircular. So the one which was inner now, here is middle. So that is circular going around the stomach like that. Then outer longitudinal. So these are going straight up and down through the stomach. So because of the third layer of muscle, which is the oblique layer, the way the stomach contracts is different. This allows the stomach to mix things that we have swallowed effectively with gastric juice. Otherwise, the rest of the digestive system, when peristalsis is occurring, is just pushing substance towards the next phase. But here, there's mixing. So that process is known as churning. And churning is considered also as mechanical digestion. So the stomach performs both mechanical or physical digestion plus chemical digestion when gastric juice acts upon the food. Remember, we swallowed food which has sugar that has already been started to be broken down in the mouth, that continues in the stomach. In addition, protein digestion begins and lipid digestion begins in the stomach there. Okay. Another thing that is important about the muscle is presence of nerves. So there are blood vessels and also nerves. Now, between the inner circular and the outer longitudinal, we are going to find a group of nerves which are called the myenteric nerve plexus. Myenteric, my meaning muscle. Enteric, digestive system, muscles of the digestive system. So these nerves here control all these three layers of muscle. The inner oblique, middle circular, and outer longitudinal muscles are controlled by myenteric nervous system. In addition to that, these nerves I've mentioned, the myenteric plus the submucosa, are also connected to the vagus nerve. Therefore, the vagus nerve plus these two nerves are responsible for controlling digestion. That's why in patients where there's hypersecretion of gas hydrochloric acid, you find that the vagus nerve sometimes is cut into, not the whole nerve, just branches of that nerve that supply the stomach are severed so that activity on the stomach reduces, therefore reducing production of hydrochloric acid. Procedure known as vagotomy. Vagotomy. Okay. So I've explained what churning is all about. This is mixing of gastric contents with gastric juice. When that mixing is done and digestion is done, then the pyloric sphincter will loosen or relax, and then food will go from the stomach into the small intestines. Before that, the sphincter, the pyloric sphincter, remains closed. Okay. Let's look at function of the stomach, function of gastric juice. Number one, the water in the juice liquefies food so that there is an aqueous environment. Remember, all chemical reactions in the body take place in aqueous environment. It has to be in a fluid state. So whatever food we have eaten, whether it is solid, liquid, or semi-solid, it has to be added with water for easy chemical digestion. What does hydrochloric acid do? Hydrochloric acid acidifies the food. Remember, saliva is alkali, but pepsin and gastric lipase work in acidic environment. So that's why hydrochloric acid is produced. This is a very strong acid, by the way, about 1.5 to 3.5 pH or so. Apart from acidifying the food, it makes it, when food is acidified, it's easier to be broken down because acid has reduced that food. Next is it kills microorganisms. Okay. Microorganisms fail to survive in this environment. Only a few survive. Then next, hydrochloric acid activates pepsinogen into pepsin so that it can begin protein digestion. So all those are functions of the stomach. Next, what does pepsinogen do? Pepsinogen initiates protein digestion. So protein digestion begins in the stomach. Okay. Then here what we have is a process of how hydrochloric acid is synthesized. I usually like posing this question to students. So it's best that you understand this process quite well. So there are about 3 or 4 steps involved. 4 steps involved in formation of hydrochloric acid. Okay, the first process is water mixing with carbon dioxide inside parietal cells, or what we call oxyntic cells. These are the cells that produce hydrochloric acid. So when carbon dioxide mixes with water, in the presence of carbonic anhydrase, this is an enzyme found in this cell. This enzyme breaks down that. So we're going to have hydrogen molecules plus carbonic acid. Hydrogen molecule and carbonic acid. We are interested in hydrogen. Okay. So that first step is combination of carbon dioxide plus water. Then in the presence of carbonic acid, next step occurs called dissociation. This is where hydrogen atoms are generated. And whenever you have hydrogen atoms, just know that you're dealing with a very strong acid. So this is a strong acid. Then that is hydrogen bicarbonate, which will give us carbonic acid. So first step is carbon dioxide plus water, then leads to dissociation where hydrogen is separated from this compound. Now, here we are interested in hydrogen. Where does hydrogen go? So this cell has the ability now to concentrate hydrogen. Think of this process as occurring at every single moment. Carbon dioxide plus water, hydrogen molecule. So a lot of hydrogen molecules are found in higher concentration inside this cell. Then that hydrogen atom or ions are used now to form hydrochloric acid. So this cell is specialized to secrete hydrogen and absorb potassium. On the same time, this cell will secrete calcium and potassium. So when potassium reaches higher levels, it will be secreted, plus chlorine. Did I say calcium? Chlorine. So when chlorine now mixes with hydrochloric acid, we mixes with hydrogen, then hydrochloric acid is formed. So take note that hydrochloric acid is not produced inside the parietal cells. Rather, it is produced outside the cell, because even this cell can be eaten up by hydrochloric acid, a very strong acid. So that acid is only formed outside the cell when chlorine mixes with hydrogen. So first, carbon dioxide plus water. In the presence of carbonic anhydrase, dissociation occurs. Hydrogen molecules are formed. When hydrogen molecules are formed, they are secreted outside the cell in exchange for potassium. Stored potassium plus chlorine is secreted by the cell to form hydrochloric acid, which is used to activate pepsinogen into pepsin. At the same time, helps to kill off microorganisms. So let's look at phases of gastric secretion. Phases of gastric secretion, they are summarized here. Phases of gastric secretion. So gastric juice in the stomach there can be secreted by various stimulus. Certain stimulus occurring on the body can cause us to produce a lot of hydrochloric acid. Gastric juice. Number 1 is cephalic. So thinking about food, smelling nice food, tasting food in the mouth, and seeing food and thinking about food, thought. So sight and thought, tasting food, smelling food, all those will cause secretion in the stomach. So if you're hungry and then you go near a restaurant, you're just actually putting yourself in more trouble and you don't have money to buy food, because the longer you stay there, the more acid will be produced. And since there's no content in the stomach, that may cause injury to the mucosa. Now, as long as you are hungry, I mean, you can't divert your mind away from the thought of food. So still, there will be gastric juice secreted at that phase. So since these processes deal with the brain, we call that as cephalic phase. Number 2 is gastric phase. The moment food enters in the stomach, the moment you have swallowed something, gastrin is secreted. Remember, the stomach, when it is empty, the folds are plenty. When the stomach is full, the folds are less. Come in. John. Yeah, I'm in class. You have to see me some other time. Yeah. Just come to okay, I'll give you a call when I'm done. All right. Yeah. Then we can schedule a meeting. Huh? We can schedule a meeting that. All right. So we're saying when the contents enter the stomach, the rugae stretch, and that stretching stimulates gastrin cells, the cells we are calling enteroendocrine cells. These cells stimulate the other cells in the stomach, the mucus cells, parietal cells or xanthic cells, chief cells or zymogenic cells, to produce their secretions. So that is gastric phase, since it's dealing with physical entrance of food in the stomach. Okay, then the other one is now intestinal phase. So when digestion is complete in the stomach and then food goes into the small intestine, the moment the pyloric sphincter here relaxes, food goes there in the duodenum. The moment food enters in the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, there are enteroendocrine cells in the small intestine, similar to G cells, the ones that produce gastrin. Equally, those cells will send signals to the G cells. The G cells will again send signals to the parietal cells and the chief cells to secrete more, so that in case there's any substance in the stomach that is left undigested, it has to be completely digested. So we call that as intestinal phase, since it is dealing with physical entrance of food in the intestines. So those are the 3 phases of gastric juice secretion: cephalic, thought of food, seeing food, smell, tasting food; gastric, when food enters in the stomach; and finally intestinal, when food enters in the intestine. These 2, gastric and intestinal, they are regulated by local hormones secreted by enteroendocrine cells found in the stomach and small intestines. That is explained. Let's look at duration of food in the stomach. Which food stays longest in the stomach? So number 1 is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates last the least in the stomach. Okay, so by 2 to 3 hours, a carbohydrate meal is gone. Take, for instance, if you had rice in the morning only, you'll be full. You feel happy that you're full, but within few hours, you find that all of that is gone, because carbohydrate digestion is the fastest. Begins in the mouth, continues in the stomach, then finally in the small intestine. So carbohydrates don't last long. Same with alcohol. When alcohol enters in the stomach, there and then absorption begins. If it's spirit, some of them are even absorbed in the esophagus. They'll enter the blood vessels. Protein meals remains longer, but it is fatty meal that remains the longest. Okay. So if you look at protein meal, We have red and white meat. So of the two, red meat stays longer. White meat maybe a day or so or less, but white meat less than a day or slightly towards 24 hours. Then red meat longer. Red meat stays longer. Can stay even 2 to 3 days, depending on the type of meat we had. Especially if it wasn't well cooked, like these things we have for braai, you just braai them on the surface. They're not fully, prepared inside there. It would take time for acid to destroy that protein so that enzymes can act on it. So it's best that, especially red meat, is well cooked, properly cooked, so that it doesn't stay longer, because the longer it stays, forcing the stomach to produce more hydrochloric acid, and that is injurious to the mucosa lining. That can cause serious ulcerations, later on leading to gastric cancers and the rest. Okay. Function of the stomach, I think we hinted on this one. We are saying the stomach acts as a temporal storage site, so allows gastric juice to effectively mix with the contents. Then, apart from performing chemical digestion, stomach can also perform mechanical digestion. Yeah, I'll pass through Pamand. Okay. All right. Madam Yunda knows also. Madam Yunda knows. Oh. I'll text her. Okay. So we're saying the stomach performs chemical digestion where there's breakdown of fat, there's breakdown of protein, breakdown of carbohydrates. Okay. Then it also performs physical digestion, or what we call mechanical digestion. I explained that the action of these three muscles that are found in the stomach, inner oblique, middle circular, outer longitudinal, they perform the process known as churning. When churning is done, that product of churning, we call it chyme. So chyme is food that is well mixed with gastric juice. So it is chyme that leaves the stomach to go into the small intestine. Then there's limited absorption. So which substance is absorbed in the stomach? We have water, alcohol. So alcohol is absorbed in the stomach. And some lipid-soluble drugs. Lipid-soluble drugs are also absorbed in the stomach. Stomach also helps in non-specific defense against various types of microorganisms. Okay. Then preparation of iron. So iron is absorbed in the large intestine. So hydrochloric acid helps to prepare iron for absorption. Okay, you remember iron is useful for bones. Iron is useful in the liver as well as formation of red blood cells. The heme part of hemoglobin is iron. So we need iron to be absorbed. And that depends on functional stomach. That's why people with gastrectomy usually develop various types of anemia. Production of intrinsic factor. I was saying intrinsic factor here is useful in absorption of extrinsic factor, otherwise known as vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is essential in formation of red blood cells. Aside from that, vitamin B12 is also essential in the formation of myelin sheath. I explained myelin sheath under nerve tissue. So saying myelin sheath is insulator around large axons. That insulator is achieved, or that process of wrapping around axon is achieved if there is high supply of vitamin B12 in the body. If this is lacking, especially in people who take, alcohol, and then they lack vitamin B12, these are people that end up running mad. Okay. So usually you administer vitamin B12 to alcoholics so that myelin sheath is not removed, because alcohol destroys myelin sheath. Then regulation of passage of gastric content. So the stomach acting as a temporal storage site, it stores food for some time so that effective digestion takes place before contents go to the small intestines. So that is all about the stomach. So the structures we have discussed so far: mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, belong to what we call the foregut. Foregut. So foregut is the first part of the digestive system. Then we have midgut, which is the middle part of the digestive system. Then we have the hindgut, the last part there. So foregut begins from mouth and ends halfway in the duodenum. So the duodenum is part of the foregut. Then the lower part of the duodenum is part of the midgut. The midgut begins from the lower half of the duodenum all the way to the large intestine. So begins here, midgut, midway in the duodenum, then all these small intestines, colon, this is now large intestine, all the way up to here, transverse colon. So much of the transverse colon is midgut, going back together with ascending colon, cecum, appendix. All those are midgut, plus jejunum and ileum, midgut. Then this last portion now, the last part of the transverse colon, the descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum, and anus, those belong to hindgut. So digestive system divided into three parts: foregut, midgut, and hindgut. So for today, we end here on the stomach.